There were two of them. That is the whole story, and I want you to hold on to it, because everything that happens over the next hour turns on a fact so small that nobody in this story thought about it even once. Two insulated lunch bags. Navy blue, soft-sided, a white zipper, a little mesh pocket on the side for a water bottle. They came in a 2-pack from a grocery store end cap for $11, and a woman bought them because $11 for two is better than $9 for one. And that is the kind of reasoning that runs most households in this country. For 14 months, one of those bags carried turkey sandwiches and apple slices and a note with a drawing on it. The other one carried something else, and every single morning, both of them sat on the second shelf of the same refrigerator, 4 inches apart, touching. I want to say something about that before we start, and my name is Nathan, and this is the part of the job I actually care about. People think a hidden thing is a safe thing. It isn't. Hidden and unlabeled are two completely different states, and only one of them survives contact with an ordinary Tuesday. A plan that works perfectly, as long as nobody in the house ever makes a normal mistake, is not a plan. It is a bet. It is a bet placed against a 7-year-old every morning for 14 months, and the odds compound. Somebody in this story was very smart. Genuinely. The plan was patient and medically literate, and it was working. And it was undone in 9 seconds by a boy in a dinosaur shirt who was in a hurry, because his father had already started the truck. Stay with the 2 bags. They come back, and not the way you think. Cordova Falls sits in the bottom corner of Braden County, where the river bends twice and gives up, and it is the kind of town where people know what your grandfather did for a living. In the Marsden family's case, they knew what the great-grandfather did, because there is a photograph of it in the County Historical Museum, in the second case on the left, and it has been there since 1974. The photograph is from October of 1931. It shows an 18-room Queen Anne house sitting 11 feet off the ground on a cradle of oak timbers, suspended in the middle of a dirt road, with 14 mules in front of it and about 60 people standing around watching. In the front row, hands in his pockets, in a coat too thin for the weather, is Jacob Marsden. He was 31 years old. He had contracted to move that house 4.5 miles from the old Ridgewater estate to a parcel of ground he had bought with everything he had, and everybody in the county told him it would fall apart before it crossed the creek. It took 9 days. It did not fall apart. The house came to rest on a new foundation on 11 acres at the top of a slow rise, and it has sat there ever since, and 4 generations of Marsdens have been born and raised and buried out of it. Logan Marsden was the 4th. He was 38 years old, and he did what Jacob did, only with hydraulics. Marsden Structural Movers occupied a gravel yard on the east edge of town with a shop building, a lean-to for the dollies, and an office with a window unit that rattled. 9 employees. A fleet of steel beams stacked by length like a lumber yard. Logan lifted houses. He lifted them out of floodplains. He lifted them off failing foundations. He lifted historic buildings out of the path of highway widenings and set them down somewhere they would be allowed to keep standing. He had moved a 19th century church 300 feet and a brick schoolhouse 11 miles. He had never once dropped anything. You should understand something about that work, because it explains the man. Moving a house is not a matter of strength. It is a matter of arithmetic and patience, and an absolute refusal to be rushed. Before anything comes off the ground, Logan spent 2 to 4 weeks writing a lift plan, where the weight actually is, what the framing does when you take the foundation away, where the beams go, where the cribbing towers go, how many jacking points, what each one carries. A single house might sit on 112 hydraulic jacks all tied to one manifold, so that every one of them rises at exactly the same rate, because a house does not care about being lifted. It cares about being lifted unevenly. A 1/4-inch difference across 60 feet will open a crack in plaster that 100 years of weather never managed. Logan was quiet in the way that men who do that work are quiet. He wrote things down. He photographed everything, always, out of a habit his father had beaten into him, because in the moving business, the only thing standing between you and a lawsuit is a dated picture of what the wall looked like before you touched it. He had 4 filing cabinets of paper he would never need. His sister Margaret, who ran the office and had run it since their father died, used to tell customers that Logan documented a job like a man expecting to be accused of something. She meant it as a joke. His father, Ronald Marsden, had died at 52, and the way he died is important. It started as a tremor in the right hand that he blamed on the vibration from the jack pumps. Then his handwriting shrank. Then his feet started sticking to the floor when he tried to turn around in a doorway. It took 11 months to get a diagnosis, and another 2 years for it to finish him. And Logan was 24 and holding the flashlight for most of it. The family called it young onset Parkinson's, because that is what the neurologist at the time said it most resembled. And nobody in that family ever said the other word out loud, which was hereditary. Logan had grown up expecting it. He knew the shape of the thing that was going to come for him. That matters more than anything else in this story, and I need you to hold it next to the 2 lunch bags, because someone else knew he expected it too. He met Jillian Foley on the worst night of his life. She was the night shift nurse on the floor where his father was dying, and she was 22, and she was kind in a way that was not performative. She brought Logan coffee at 3 in the morning without being asked. She explained what the numbers on the monitor meant in plain language. When Ronald Marsden finally went, she was the one who came in and turned off the alarms and stood there for a minute with her hand on the rail, which is not a thing nurses have time to do. They married 4 years later. Jillian went from hospital floors to long-term care and was good at it, genuinely good. And by 34 she was director of nursing at Gentry House Memory Care out on the county road. She had a low, steady voice that families trusted immediately. She could talk a frightened 90-year-old down out of a corner in under a minute. Ask anyone in Cordova Falls in the spring of that year, and they would have told you Jillian Marsden was the best thing that ever happened to that family. Hudson was 7, second grade at Braden Elementary, Mrs. Langley's class, front table by the pencil sharpener because he could not be trusted at the back. He had a dinosaur shirt he wore twice a week over his mother's objections. He could name every piece of equipment in his father's yard, including the difference between a unified jacking manifold and a bottle jack, and he corrected adults about it, which they found charming for about 90 seconds. The house on Ridgewater Road had a mudroom off the kitchen with a second refrigerator in it, the old one, because Jillian kept work things in there and did not want them in with the food. Vaccine boxes, sample kits, cold packs. Nobody in that family had opened that refrigerator in 3 years except her, and there is nothing sinister about that, which is exactly why it worked. And on the second shelf of the main refrigerator, every night, side by side, 4 inches apart, 2 navy blue insulated lunch bags with white zippers. Now the 8 months before, it started with a chalk line. Logan was snapping a line on a floor deck on a job in March, a thing he had done 10,000 times, and the line came out wrong. Not a little wrong. Bowed. He stood up and looked at his left hand and watched it do something it had never done, which was move without him. Then it was the porch step at the Kellerman's house, where he missed the tread entirely and went down onto his shoulder in front of 2 employees. Then it was a client's name. Then it was a Tuesday morning when he sat in the truck in his own driveway for 4 minutes, because he could not remember whether he was going to the yard or to the job site. And the fear that went through him then was not surprise. It was recognition. It was the exact fear he had been carrying since he was 24. He told Jillian, of course. She was a nurse, and she did everything right. She was calm. She said the thing you say, which is that it is probably nothing, and then she said the thing that made it real, which is that they should get it looked at anyway. She made the appointment. She drove him. She sat in the room and took notes on her phone, because Logan would not remember the details, and she was correct. He would not have. Dr. Liana Abbott, movement disorders, 90 minutes away in the city. First visit in April, then June, then July, then a standing appointment on the 14th of September that Jillian had circled on the kitchen calendar in green pen. By August, the tremor was in both hands in the mornings. By August, Logan had stopped doing the final walk on lifts and handed it to Xander Griffith, his jacking foreman, who was 61 and had worked for Logan's father and who took the clipboard without saying one word about it, which was its own kind of kindness. By August, Logan had a folder in the office with a lawyer's name on it, and the folder was about what happens to 9 employees, and a company and a boy, when the man in charge cannot be in charge anymore. He was 38, and he had started measuring his life in the way you measure a structure you already know is going to have to come down. And every weekday morning, Jillian made him a protein shake in a stainless thermos because he had stopped eating breakfast, and she was worried, and she said so in front of people. Chocolate, banana, a scoop of the powder from the tub on the counter. She put it in his lunch bag. Navy blue, white zipper. Hers went in beside it. The morning of September the 4th was ordinary in every respect, and I want to be precise about the timing because the timing is the entire thing. Logan had a pour scheduled at 7:15 at the new site for a farmhouse they were setting the following week, which meant leaving the house by 6:40. He was outside at 6:36, in the truck, engine running, defroster on, because there was a fog off the river. Hudson had not eaten. Hudson never ate. Jillian was in the shower. Logan leaned on the horn. Inside the house, a 7-year-old in a dinosaur shirt with one shoe untied ran through the kitchen, pulled open the refrigerator, and took a navy blue insulated lunch bag off the second shelf. He took the one on the left. He was in the truck in 11 seconds. Logan reached over and pulled the seatbelt across him, because he always did. They talked about a beaver dam on the way, the one down past the culvert, and whether beavers sleep at night or during the day, and Logan said he did not know, and Hudson said he would find out and report back. Logan dropped him at the loop at 6:52. He watched him go in through the blue doors with the bag over his shoulder, and then he drove to the pour, and he did not think about it again for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Braden Elementary ate lunch in 3 shifts. Second grade went at 11 o'clock, at the long tables near the windows, under a laminated poster about the food groups that had been on that wall since before any child in the room was born. Hudson Marsden sat where he always sat, between a boy named Tyler and the wall. He put the navy blue bag on the table and pulled the zipper, and the first thing he noticed was that it was cold. Really cold, the kind of cold that makes the outside of a bag sweat, and there were 2 blue gel packs in there instead of 1, which he thought was strange but not alarming, because when you are 7, the world is full of things adults have decided for reasons they did not explain. There was no sandwich. There was a stainless thermos, which was normal, because his dad had one and so did his mom. There was a soft zippered pouch, the kind a woman keeps makeup in, dark gray with a red pull tab. There was a flat cardboard card of pills and bubbles, half of them empty. There was a small white plastic thing with a screw top that he did not recognize. And there was a spiral notebook, the little kind, the size of your hand, with a bent cover. Hudson unzipped the gray pouch, because he was 7, and the pouch was the most interesting object on the table. Inside were 4 glass vials with white labels and rubber tops, packed in a foam sleeve, and 3 syringes, sealed in plastic, with orange caps. He held one up. He said, out loud, to Tyler, that his mom must have a cake thing in here, because he had seen a woman on a video use a thing like that to put frosting inside a cupcake, and he was genuinely pleased with himself for figuring it out. Tyler laughed. 2 girls across the table looked over. Shirley Ramsey had worked the cafeteria at Braden Elementary for 26 years. She was 58 and she had a bad hip, and she spent every lunch shift walking the same 3 aisles opening yogurt cups and cutting oranges. And she was, at that moment, about 11 feet away. She had seen a lot of things come out of lunch bags. Beer, twice. A pocket knife, more often than she liked. A dead frog. She had never seen a needle. Everything that happened next happened by protocol, and I want to say clearly that every single adult in that building did their job correctly, which is not something you get to say very often in stories like this one. Shirley did not shout. She walked over, put her hand flat on the table next to the pouch, and said, in a completely level voice, that she was going to hold on to that for him. She got the pouch, the card of pills, the white plastic thing, and the thermos into the bag, zipped it, and carried it to the office at a walk. On the way she caught the eye of the aide at the door and said 4 words, and the aide went to the phone. Heidi Langley came down from her classroom. Olivia Malloy, the school nurse, came out of her office and did the thing school nurses are trained to do, which is get the child away from the item and get the item onto a hard surface where nobody touches it. Then she looked at the vials. Nurse Malloy had spent 11 years in an emergency department before she took the school job for the hours. She knew what she was looking at, mostly. 2 of the 4 vials were labeled, and the labels were pharmacy labels, real ones, with a patient name on them that was not Marsden, and a facility name that was. The third had a label that had been scraped, not peeled, scraped, with something sharp, so that the drug name was gone, but the ghost of the printing was still visible if you turned it in the light. The fourth was a small amber bottle with a handwritten piece of tape on it and 2 letters in ballpoint. The white plastic thing with the screw top was a pill crusher. There was residue in it. Nurse Malloy stood up straight and told the principal to call the police, and then she said the sentence that decided the entire rest of this story, which was, "Do not let anyone leave with that bag." Irene Osborne had been principal at Braden Elementary for 9 years, and she had made maybe 4 phone calls in her career that she still remembered word for word. She made 2 of them in the next 6 minutes. The first was to the Cordova Falls Police Department. The second was to a father. Except she did not make the second one. Heidi Langley did, because Mrs. Langley had Logan Marsden's cell number in her phone from a field trip in the spring, and because Mrs. Osborne was on the other line, and because at that particular moment somebody needed to be told to come, and nobody could wait. Logan was standing on a concrete pad in the sun with a screed in his hands when his phone rang at 11:03. He answered it with his shoulder. He would tell you later, months later, that he does not remember what she said in the middle. He remembers the first 4 words and the last 4 words and nothing in between. The first 4 were, "Mr. Marsden, it's Heidi." The last 4 were, "Sir, come immediately, please." He asked one question. He asked if Hudson was hurt. She said no. She said it fast, and she said it twice, and she said it in a voice that was doing everything it could to be steady and was not managing it. And that was the part that got into Logan's chest and stayed there. Because a teacher who tells you your son is fine in that voice is telling you that something is very wrong, and it is not the kind of wrong she has words for. He handed the screed to Xander Griffith without looking at him. He was in the truck before he had fully processed that he was walking. Braden Elementary was 14 minutes from that site. He did it in 9. He came up the long drive past the buses, and he saw them before he had the truck in park. 2 Cordova Falls patrol cars, nose in, at an angle, right in front of the main doors, in the fire lane, which is where police park when they are not planning to leave soon. Both of them empty. Logan Marsden had spent his whole adult life doing a job where the entire discipline is, do not panic, because panicking is how people get crushed. He sat in the truck for exactly 1 second and made himself breathe out, and then he went in through the blue doors at a walk. The front office at Braden Elementary is a glass box with a counter and 3 chairs and a bulletin board covered in construction paper leaves. There were 2 officers in it. There was a woman at the counter with her hand over her mouth. Mrs. Osborne was standing in the doorway of the nurse's room, and she was the color of the wall behind her. And there was Hudson, sitting in one of the 3 chairs, swinging his feet, absolutely fine, eating an ice cream sandwich that somebody had clearly given him to keep him occupied. And when he saw his father, he lit up and said, with his mouth full, that he was not in trouble. They said so twice. Logan got down on one knee in the middle of that office and put both hands on his son's shoulders and checked him the way you check a load before you lift it, which is to say completely and in order and without any expression on your face at all. The boy was fine. That is when Irene Osborne said his name and asked him to step in here for a moment, and her voice cracked on the word moment. The nurse's room at Braden Elementary is 11 feet by 9 feet, with a cot, a sink, a scale, and a laminate table. Everything from the bag was laid out on that table on a paper drape. Nothing was in a bag yet. An officer was photographing it, one item at a time, with a department camera, and Nurse Malloy was standing with her arms folded so tightly, it looked like she was holding herself together physically. Irene Osborne closed the door and did not sit down. She was shaking. Logan could see it in the papers she was holding, a fine tremor across the top edge. And there is a black irony in that which did not escape him later, because he had spent 8 months watching his own hands do the same thing. She said he had opened it at lunch. She said it was not his bag, and it took Logan a second and a half to understand that sentence. Then she said, "I need you to look at this, and I am so sorry." The officer stepped back from the table. Logan looked at the 4 vials in their foam sleeve and did not know what they were. He looked at the syringes and did not know what they were for. He looked at the card of pills and the pill crusher with residue in it and understood nothing. Then he looked at the notebook. It had been opened flat and photographed and left open, and it was the only object on that table that was written in a hand he had known for 16 years. It was a grid, hand ruled with a straight edge, which was such a Jillian thing to do that his brain snagged on it before it snagged on anything else. Dates down the left margin, 1 line per day, going back. Then 4 narrow columns. The columns were headed AM, PM, WT. Notes. The rows were headed with a single letter, L. He read across the top line, and the top line said 0.25 with a check, and then the next one, and the next one. And the notebook went back and back through pages, and the numbers climbed in a staircase. 0.25, then 0.25 twice a day, then 0.5, and beside them in the WT column were numbers he recognized because they were his weight. In pounds, week by week, dropping, 194, 191, 188, 183. And in the notes column, in the small tidy handwriting of a woman who had made honor roll every semester of her life, were phrases like, 2 falls, tolerated, slurring at dinner, family noticed, good day, watch it, reduce, too fast. And on the last written line, dated the 2nd of September, 2 days earlier, it said, hold at 0.5 until after Abbott 914, Dr. Liana Abbott, movement disorders. The 14th of September, circled on his own kitchen calendar in green pen by the woman who had made the appointment and driven him there and taken the notes. There is a thing that happens in the body when a load shifts unexpectedly. Everyone who has worked around heavy things knows it. It is not fear exactly. It is a kind of total stillness, where your hearing goes flat and narrow and every muscle in you locks, while your brain does arithmetic at a speed it will never manage again. Logan Marsden stood in a nurse's room in an elementary school and understood, in about 4 seconds, that he was not sick. He understood that he had never been sick. He understood that for 14 months a woman had been getting up before him, making a shake, putting it in a navy blue bag, and writing down what it did to him. And he understood one more thing, the worst one, the one that made him put his hand flat on that laminate table to keep himself upright, which was this. There were 2 bags, every morning, 4 inches apart, and his son had reached into that refrigerator every school day for 2 years. Detective Bradley Ingram arrived at 11:41. He was 46. He had been a detective in a town of 9,000 people for 11 years, and the largest thing he had ever worked was an arson at a boat storage. He found Logan Marsden standing perfectly still in the hallway outside the nurse's room with his hands at his sides. Ingram said later that in 11 years he had never had a conversation like the one that followed, because the man did not shout, did not accuse, did not cry, and did not ask a single question about his wife. He asked 2 questions total. The first was whether he could photograph the pages of the notebook. Ingram said no, and explained why, and braced for the argument, because there is always an argument. Logan nodded once. Then he asked the second question, and Ingram has repeated it in 3 separate trainings since. He said, "Then will you photograph every page, front and back, including the blank ones, before that leaves this room? And will you write down the time you did it?" Ingram asked him why the blank ones. Logan said, "Because the pressure from the pen goes through. If she tore pages out, they are still in there. And if anybody ever says pages were added later, the blank ones are how you prove they weren't." Ingram went and got a second camera. Here is what was in that lunch bag, formally, as it appeared on the evidence receipt Logan was handed at 2:15 that afternoon. 4 glass vials, 2 labeled to Gentry House Memory Care with a resident's name and a controlled substance schedule, 1 with the label defaced, 1 amber bottle, unlabeled, handwritten tape, 3 sterile syringes with needles, unopened, 1 blister card, partial, of a beta blocker in a strength used for tremor, 1 blister card, partial, of an anticholinergic used for bladder control in elderly patients, which in a healthy 38-year-old man produces confusion, memory disturbance, dry mouth, blurred vision, and heat intolerance, and which is the single most reliable non-exotic way to make a person look like they are cognitively declining. 1 pill crusher with residue, 1 stainless thermos, 16 ounces, containing 4 ounces of a chocolate protein beverage, 1 spiral notebook, 64 ruled pages, 41 of them written on, 2 blue gel packs. And that is where chapter 1 of this thing ends. And here is what Logan Marsden did next, and it tells you everything about why he wins. He did not go home. He stood in the parking lot of Braden Elementary with his son's hand in his, and he called Xander Griffith, and he said, "Bring the flatbed and meet me at the yard." Then he called his sister Margaret and said, "Nobody goes to my house. Not you, not the crew, not Jillian's mother, nobody. If she comes to the office, be normal, be kind, tell her nothing, and write down the time she got there and the time she left." Margaret said, "Logan, what is happening?" And Logan Marsden said the only sentence he said out loud that entire day about how he felt. He said, "I have been on a job for 14 months, and nobody showed me the plan." Then he drove his son to a diner on Route 9 and bought him a grilled cheese and asked him about beavers. To understand why any of this happened, you have to leave the house and go 8 miles out the county road to a long, low building with a portico and a fountain that has never run, called Gentry House Memory Care. Gentry House had 48 beds, and it was owned, along with 3 other facilities in 2 counties, by a man named Devin Ainsworth. Devin Ainsworth was 44, and he was not a healthcare person, and he would have told you so himself, cheerfully, at a Chamber of Commerce lunch. He was a landman. He had grown up watching his father lose a farm, and had decided at 19 that the only real asset in the world is dirt that somebody else is going to want in 10 years. He bought raw parcels, he assembled them, he sold the assembly for many times what the pieces cost, and the memory care facilities were a means to an end, because in this state a licensed care facility gets you zoning flexibility that raw land never will. The business model at Gentry House was called an entry fee model, and it is entirely legal and extremely common, and you should know how it works. A family pays a one-time, non-refundable entry fee to secure a private pay bed. At Gentry House, it was $85,000. Then they pay monthly on top of that. When the resident dies, the bed becomes available, and a new family pays a new $85,000 entry fee, which means that every private pay bed in that building has a number attached to it, and the number is, how often does it turn over? I am not going to pretend that everyone who runs a facility like that is a monster. Most are not. But I want you to sit with the arithmetic for a second. Because Devin Ainsworth had, and he had written it on a whiteboard in his own office in a meeting with his lender, and that whiteboard was eventually photographed by an investigator. 11 private pay beds. Average length of stay, 31 months. If average length of stay came down to 22 months, the same 11 beds would generate an additional $468,000 a year with no new construction, no new staff, and no new residents in the census. He did not write that down as a plan. He wrote it down as a market observation. That is how these things always start, and it is why the whiteboard mattered so much later. Jillian Marsden had been director of nursing at Gentry House for 4 years. I have thought a lot about how to tell this part, because it would be easy and dishonest to say she was always like this. She was not. There are 11 years of employment records and dozens of families who wrote letters, and in the first 2 years at Gentry House, she was, by every account, the best director that building ever had. She fought for staffing. She wrote up an aide for rough handling. She sat with a woman named Annette Cullen for 2 hours on a Sunday she was not being paid for. What happened is smaller and uglier than a monster. What happened is a series of decisions, each of which was slightly worse than the one before, and each of which had a reason. The first one was a man named Nicholas Everson. He was 84, and he had end-stage dementia, and he had been dying badly for 6 weeks, and he had a standing comfort order, and one night Jillian gave the dose at the top of the range instead of the bottom, and he died at 4 a.m. instead of some morning the following week. That is a defensible clinical decision. Nurses make it. Hospice exists. But there was a second thing that happened that week, and it is the hinge of this entire story. Devin Ainsworth stopped by her office, closed the door, and thanked her. Not for the clinical judgment. He thanked her for how quickly the room was ready. He said the family from the waitlist was very grateful. He said, and this is verbatim from her own later statement, that she was the only person in that building who understood that a bed sitting empty is a family waiting in a hospital hallway. And then, 3 weeks later, there was a bonus. Not a large one. $1,100, categorized as census incentive, on a line item that 11 other employees also received. That is how you build a person. Not with a bag of money. With a thank you and $1,100, and a story about the families waiting in hallways. Over the next 19 months, 9 residents at Gentry House died. Every single one of them was elderly. Every single one had a terminal or end-stage diagnosis, and every single death was recorded as expected. No family complained. 2 of them sent flowers to the nursing staff. And in a facility where the director of nursing is required to serve as the second witness on controlled substance wastage, Logan Marsden's signature appeared on 61% of all waste events, which is a statistically absurd number in a building with 3 shifts. That is the crime nobody knew about, running quietly out on the county road, while in town a man wrote lift plans and photographed walls. Now the 2 things collide. The 11 acres at the top of Ridgewater Road, with the 1890s Queen Anne on it, sat exactly in the middle of a piece of ground Devin Ainsworth had spent 6 years assembling. He had 291 acres under contract, or owned outright, in 9 parcels, wrapped around the Marsden property on 3 sides. His plan was a 240-unit continuing care campus, and his lender had issued a term sheet with a hard expiration, and every appraisal and every traffic study and every sewer extension in that file assumed one thing: the road frontage. The only road frontage in the whole assemblage was the 11 acres at the top of the rise. Marsden ground. He offered Logan $400,000, then $900,000. Then, in February of that year, sitting in the office with the rattling window unit, he offered $2,400,000 for 11 acres in a county where farmland went for $9,000 an acre. Logan Marsden turned it down in under a minute, and he was not rude about it, and he explained why. And the explanation is the reason he had a target on him for the rest of the year. He said, "My great-grandfather moved that house 4.5 miles with mules because a bank took the land it was standing on. It is not a house, it is a receipt, and I am not selling the receipt." Devin Ainsworth smiled and shook his hand and drove out to Gentry House and sat in the director of nursing's office with the door closed for 50 minutes. Nobody recorded that conversation. What we know is what happened afterward, which is that 11 days later, a woman opened a small spiral notebook, ruled it with a straight edge into 4 columns, wrote a single letter at the top of the first row, and wrote 0.25 in the AM box. And I want to be very clear about the plan, because it was not the plan you are expecting, and its cleverness is the reason it nearly worked. They never intended to kill Logan Marsden. A dead husband is a homicide investigation and an insurance claim and a medical examiner. A dead husband is 30 people asking questions. A husband who deteriorates neurologically over 18 months, whose father died of the same thing at 52, who has a documented family history, who is under the care of a respected specialist 90 minutes away, whose own employees have watched him fall and forget and hand over the clipboard, and whose devoted wife has driven him to every appointment and reported his symptoms carefully. That man does not get investigated. That man gets a conservatorship. A conservator controls the property. A conservator can petition to sell real estate to fund the protected person's care. A conservator, in this state, with a supportive physician's letter and an uncontested filing, can be appointed in about 90 days. 11 acres of road frontage, $2,400,000, and a man in a chair by a window who has trouble following the conversation, being taken care of by everybody's favorite nurse. That was the plan. It had a timeline. It had a physician's appointment on the 14th of September, at which the dose was to be at its peak, and there is a phrase in that notebook I did not tell you about earlier, 4 pages back from the last entry, and it reads, "Need 1 bad apt on record, not 2. 1 is enough." Logan Marsden was interviewed at the Cordova Falls Police Department at 4:40 that afternoon, voluntarily, without an attorney, and she was extraordinary. You have to understand that she had spent 14 years explaining medical situations to frightened people. She was fluent, she was warm. She corrected Detective Ingram gently twice on terminology and apologized both times for correcting him. Her account was this. She was a hospice-trained nurse who did home visits for 2 long-standing private patients on her days off. She carried a comfort kit, which is a real thing that real nurses really carry. The notebook was a patient log. The letter L was a patient, an 81-year-old man whose family had asked her to help. The weights were his weights. The falls were his falls. The scraped label was a pharmacy error she had been meaning to report for a month. and she was frankly relieved it had come up, because she had been sick about it. And the thermos, she said, with her eyes filling, was her husband's breakfast, which she made every morning, and she must have put it in the wrong bag, because she had been running on 4 hours of sleep for a year, because her husband was dying of the same illness that killed his father, and she was trying to hold a household together. She wept. It was not fake. That is the part people find hardest to accept, and it is the part I most want you to remember. It was not fake. She had been living inside a story where she was a woman under unbearable strain, and every word of that story was true except for the cause. They released her at 6:50 that evening. No charges. The vials went to the state lab, and the state lab, at that time, had a 14-week backlog. And at 9:15 the next morning, before Logan Marsden had finished his first cup of coffee in the office above the equipment yard, Jillian's attorney filed an emergency ex parte petition in Braden County Family Court. The petition said that Logan Marsden suffered from a progressive neurological disorder, documented by a movement disorders specialist over 14 months, with a family history of the same condition, that he had experienced falls, confusion, and episodes of disorientation witnessed by employees, that on the 4th of September he had removed the minor child from school and had not returned him to the marital residence, and that the mother had reason to fear for the child's safety in a vehicle operated by a man with an impaired gait and cognitive symptoms. It asked for temporary sole custody, immediately, without a hearing. Judge Barbara Trenton granted it at 11:05, pending a full hearing in 11 days, because that is what judges do with an unopposed emergency filing supported by a 14-month medical record, and because there was nothing in front of her that said otherwise. At 2 that afternoon, a deputy came to the gravel yard on the east edge of town, and Logan Marsden handed his son over in the parking lot and told him it was fine, it was a paperwork thing, and that he would see him very soon, and he did not let his face do anything at all until the car was out of the driveway. Then he went inside and sat down on the floor of the shop, with his back against a stack of steel beams, for about 4 minutes, and then he got up and did the only thing he actually knew how to do, which was write a lift plan. He drove 90 minutes to the city the next morning without an appointment and sat in Dr. Liana Abbott's waiting room for 5 hours until she came out at the end of her clinic and said she could give him 10 minutes. He gave her the evidence receipt. He gave her the 2 drug names from the blister cards. He told her about the notebook and the columns and the letter L and the phrase about the 14th of September. Dr. Abbott, who is 61 and has been practicing movement disorders for 28 years, did something Logan did not expect. She did not comfort him, and she did not doubt him. She turned to her computer and opened his chart and started reading it out loud, and after about 90 seconds her voice changed. Because here is what 14 months of that chart said, and Logan had never read it, because nobody reads their own chart. Patient's wife reports nocturnal falls, 3 times weekly. Patient's wife reports word-finding difficulty at dinner. Patient's wife reports he became lost driving a familiar route. Patient's wife reports increasing rigidity in the mornings. Patient's wife reports he did not recognize a long-time employee. Wife, wife, wife. 14 months of history, and almost none of it had come out of the patient's mouth. Dr. Abbott sat back and said quietly, the thing that no physician ever wants to say, which is that she had been given a very good history by a very credible reporter, and she had believed it, and that the objective findings on her own exams had never been as impressive as the history, and she had written that down herself, 4 separate times, in a line at the bottom of each note that she now read aloud in a flat voice. Exam less severe than reported functional decline. She had noticed. She had written it down, and she had not known what to do with it, because the alternative explanation is not one that occurs to a reasonable person. Then she asked him a question that changed everything. She asked how long his hair was. Logan said, short, number 2 on the sides. He had been cutting it the same way since he was 20, she said. Blood shows me the last 2 days. Urine shows me the last week. Hair grows about 1 centimeter a month, and it locks in what was in your blood while it was growing, and if we cut it into segments, we get a timeline. But I need at least 3 inches to say anything useful. And Logan Marsden, sitting in a paper gown in an exam room in a city 90 minutes from home, said, then take it from somewhere else. They took it from his chest and from his leg. Body hair grows slower, and the segmenting is cruder, but it is measurable, and it goes back further. The sample went to a private forensic toxicology lab in another state, by courier, with a chain of custody form, and Dr. Abbott personally packed it and signed it and photographed the seal, because she had spent the drive home the previous night, realizing that she was not just a doctor in this story anymore. She was a witness. It took 19 days, in which the custody hearing came and went, and Logan Marsden sat in a courtroom and listened to a lawyer named Timothy Sheridan describe him, accurately, as a man with a documented neurological disorder who was refusing to accept his diagnosis, and got 4 supervised hours a week with his son. 19 days, in which Jillian moved back into the house on Ridgewater Road alone, and had the locks changed, and told anyone who asked that Logan was very sick and she was praying for him, and people believed her, because she cried in the grocery store and it was not an act. 19 days, in which Logan Marsden slept on a cot in the office above the equipment yard, and did not drink one thing he had not opened himself, and got up every morning at 4:30 and started building. Here is what he built, and this is where the story turns, because a man who writes lift plans does not get angry at a load. He surveys it. He started with what he knew, which was documents. He pulled the county land records for every parcel around Ridgewater and drew the assemblage by hand on a roll of tracing paper 11 feet long, taped to the shop wall, because Logan Marsden thinks with a pencil. 9 parcels, 291 acres, every one of them tied back through a chain of shell entities to Ainsworth Land Group, and in the middle, an 11-acre hole with road frontage, colored in with a yellow marker. He pulled the sewer extension application and the traffic impact study from the county planning office, both public record, both $11, and both of which stated in plain English that primary ingress and egress would be from Ridgewater Road. He pulled the building permits for Gentry House, and this is where his profession stopped being a metaphor and started being a weapon, because Logan Marsden had pulled permits in that county for 16 years and knew every plans examiner by their first name and their coffee order. The permits showed a renovation 2 years earlier that converted a 6-bed semi-private wing into 4 private pay suites, 4 more $85,000 doors. Then Xander Griffith, 61 years old, who had said almost nothing during any of this, walked into the office one evening with a phone number written on the back of a fuel receipt and said, "My niece's friend got fired out at Gentry House about 9 months ago. She's been telling people something wasn't right out there, and everybody decided she was bitter. Her name was Rhiannon Hendricks. She was 29. She had been a certified nursing assistant at Gentry House for 3 years, and she had been terminated for documentation errors 11 days after she filed an internal report that a narcotic count on the evening shift did not reconcile, and that when she raised it, she was told by the director of nursing that she had miscounted, and that the following morning the count was correct, and the page in the book had been rewritten. She had photographed the page before she left that night. She had photographed 41 pages over 3 months, because she was 29 and scared, and had watched a training video that said keep your own records, and she had put them on a flash drive in a coffee can in her mother's basement, and she had told exactly 2 people, and both of them had told her to let it go. When Logan Marsden and a lawyer named Patrice Jarvis sat down at her mother's kitchen table, Rhiannon Hendricks cried for 11 minutes before she could speak, and the first thing she said was, "I thought I was the only one who thought something was wrong." That, right there, is the loneliest sentence in this entire story, and there is a version of it happening in a building near you tonight. The toxicology came back on the 23rd of September. 2 compounds, both present, both continuous. The anticholinergic showed in every segment going back 11 months. The beta blocker appeared 8 months back and rose. Segmented against growth rate, the curve was not a curve. It was a staircase, with 4 distinct steps, and every step lined up within 9 days of a dose increase, written in a spiral notebook. Patrice Jarvis read the report twice, and then said the thing good lawyers say when the news is very good, which is that it was not enough. Toxicology proves poisoning. It does not prove a poisoner. Any competent defense says the man is a house mover who handles chemicals, or that he was self-medicating, or that the notebook is a patient log and the coincidence is tragic. And the notebook alone is a document about a person identified only by a letter. They needed to close the loop between the notebook, the drugs, the facility, and the money. And they needed Logan Marsden to hand them something, because people who have never been caught do not believe they can be. So Logan Marsden wrote the plan, and it is the most Logan Marsden thing in this entire story, because it is built on the principle that governs every lift he has ever done. You do not fight the weight. You find out where it wants to go, and you put your cribbing there. Through the attorneys, on the 2nd of October, he offered to settle everything. He would withdraw his opposition in the custody case. He would agree to a psychiatric and neurological evaluation on her chosen terms. He would sign a quitclaim deed on the 11 acres at Ridgewater, effective at the final decree, transferring the real property to her outright. He asked for exactly one thing in return, and he asked for it in the flat, defeated language of a man who has run out of road. He asked to keep the house, not the land, the structure, and 30 days of access to remove it. Timothy Sheridan read that clause out loud twice, and then explained to his client, with some amusement, that her husband appeared to want to take a 130-year-old house with him, and that this was either sentimentality or delusion, and that either way, it was the cheapest concession he had ever seen in a divorce. Logan Marsden signed the term sheet in 4 minutes. I want you to sit with that, because it is the whole psychology of this thing. She had spent 14 months carefully producing a man with a degraded mind, and when that man asked to take a house away on trucks, it did not read as a threat. It read as proof that the medicine had worked. The signing meeting was on the 7th of October in a conference room in Braden County with both attorneys, both parties, and, at Patrice Jarvis's insistence, in writing, agreed in advance by both sides, a videographer, because the settlement involved a property inventory, and inventories get argued about. That camera ran for 51 minutes. For the first 40, it was paperwork. Then they got to the personal property schedule, and the schedule listed the contents of the residence room by room, and Logan Marsden, reading from a legal pad in a slow, halting voice that his own sister later said she could not listen to, got to the mudroom. He asked, for the record, whether the second refrigerator in the mudroom was hers or his. She said it was hers. Work things. He asked whether he should list the contents. And Logan Marsden, comfortable now, 40 minutes into a meeting she was winning, in a room where her husband had just signed away $2.4 million of road frontage for a wooden building, said, on camera, with a small laugh, "Don't bother. It's just vaccine boxes and my kit. Nobody's opened that thing but me in 3 years." Patrice Jarvis did not look up from her notes. Logan Marsden turned the page on his legal pad and asked about the garage. They got in the car. Patrice Jarvis drove 4 blocks and pulled over and called Detective Bradley Ingram. The affidavit for the warrant was 11 pages. The core of it was 3 facts stacked in a specific order. A toxicology report showing 11 months of continuous administration of 2 drugs to Logan Marsden. A notebook in Logan Marsden's handwriting recording doses of an unnamed substance to a subject identified as L, whose recorded body weights matched Logan Marsden's medical record to the pound across 9 data points, and a recorded statement, made freely, in which she claimed exclusive control of an appliance in the residence. Warrants were executed on the 11th of October at 7 in the morning, on the house on Ridgewater Road, and simultaneously on Gentry House Memory Care. In the mudroom refrigerator, in a cardboard vaccine box behind 2 others, they found a second spiral notebook. It was not about Logan. Down the left margin were dates going back 22 months. Across the top, in the same hand-ruled columns, were initials, 9 sets of them, and in the notes column, in the small, tidy handwriting of a woman who made honor roll every semester of her life, were entries like, "Family in from Tulsa, hold," and "Son signed DNR finally," and, beside a set of initials belonging to a woman named Annette Cullen, who had been 89 and who had once been sat with for 2 hours on an unpaid Sunday. Waitlist has 3, room needs 2 days. Mitchell Lamont was a diversion investigator for the state, 31 years old, and he had been waiting his whole short career for a controlled substance reconciliation like the one he ran at Gentry House over the following 6 weeks. 19 months of narcotic logs against pharmacy invoices, against electronic dispensing records. 61% of all waste events second witnessed by the director of nursing. 14 of those waste events witnessed, on paper, by a nurse who was demonstrably not in the building, twice because she was on a cruise. And then the money. which was the piece everybody expected to be the ugly, obvious one, and which turned out to be the most careful thing Devin Ainsworth ever did. He never paid Logan Marsden $1. 14 months earlier, Ainsworth Land Group purchased 81 acres of failing pasture from a woman named Deborah Foley, 63, in a neighboring county, for $490,000. The county appraisal on that ground was $122,000. There is no development within 9 miles of it. It has been sitting untouched ever since. Deborah Foley is Logan Marsden's mother. 4 months after that closing, Deborah Foley made a gift of $320,000 to her daughter, reported correctly on a federal gift tax return, prepared by an accountant, entirely legal on its face. That is what it looks like when someone is careful. And it is also, when you put it on one page beside an assemblage map and a lender's term sheet with a hard expiration date, the single most damning document in the case, because there is no other reason on this earth for a landman to pay 4 times appraisal for pasture in a county he has never developed in. Devin Ainsworth was arrested on the 22nd of November in the parking lot of a bank. Logan Marsden was arrested 11 days earlier at Gentry House at 4 in the afternoon in front of a state survey team, 2 aides, and a resident's daughter, and she asked the arresting officer whether she could finish the medication pass first. The hearing that had been scheduled to determine whether Logan Marsden was fit to be near his own son took place on the 8th of December in Judge Barbara Trenton's courtroom, and it had been converted, by then, into something else entirely. Dr. Liana Abbott testified for 2 hours and 11 minutes. She walked the court through 14 months of chart notes and read her own line aloud 6 times. Exam less severe than reported functional decline. She explained hair segment analysis with a diagram. She explained the 2 drugs and what each one does to a healthy man and what the combination does, and she was asked by Timothy Sheridan, on cross, whether it was possible the patient had taken these substances himself. She said it was possible. Then she was asked, on redirect, what had happened to the patient's symptoms after the 4th of September. And this is the part people in Cordova Falls still talk about. Dr. Abbott said that on the 4th of September, Logan Marsden had a resting tremor in both hands, a shuffling gait, a documented 11-pound weight loss, and scored 24 out of 30 on a cognitive screen. She said that on the 1st of December, 88 days after his last protein shake, he had no tremor, a normal gait, had regained 14 pounds, and scored 30 out of 30. She said, "There is no neurodegenerative disease known to medicine that does that." Then, Patrice Jarvis asked the court's permission for a demonstration, and Judge Trenton allowed it over objection, and Logan Marsden stood up in the well of that courtroom and held a full glass of water at arm's length for 60 seconds, and the courtroom counted it out, and the surface of the water did not move. Devin Ainsworth's defense was that he barely knew the woman. Patrice Jarvis put the assemblage map on the screen. 291 acres in 9 parcels with an 11-acre hole colored yellow. Then the traffic study naming Ridgewater Road as sole ingress. Then the lender's term sheet with its expiration. Then the whiteboard photograph from his own office, in his own handwriting. 11 beds, 31 months, 22 months, 468,000. Then the Foley land purchase, at 4 times appraisal. Then the gift tax return. She put them up in that order, and she did not say one word connecting them, and she sat down. 9 families were notified, 2 exhumations were ordered, and both came back positive for a compound that had no business being in either body. Catherine Everson, who is a school bus driver in the next county and who had sent flowers to the nursing staff at Gentry House, testified at sentencing for 4 minutes and had to stop twice. Logan Marsden pled to 9 counts and took 32 years. Devin Ainsworth pled to conspiracy and healthcare fraud counts and took 19. Gentry House was closed by the state in March, and its 48 residents were relocated, which is its own quiet tragedy that nobody wrote a headline about. Logan Marsden received full legal and physical custody of Hudson on the 15th of December, with an order of no contact, and on a Tuesday evening in the office above the equipment yard, a 7-year-old boy who had put together more of it than anybody realized asked his father, without looking up from a coloring book, whether he had done something bad, because he took the wrong bag. And his father put down what he was holding and got level with him and said, "You did the most important thing anybody in this whole town did this year. You looked in a bag and you told the truth about what was in it. That is the entire job. That is all any of us are supposed to do. Then he said, and no, you cannot have a syringe for your birthday. The move happened on the 6th of April, at 4 in the morning. Logan Marsden had sold the 11 acres at Ridgewater, not to Ainsworth Land Group, which no longer existed, but to a conservation trust that paid $1.1 million for it, well under what the campus would have paid, and every dollar of it, after the mortgage, went into a restitution fund, administered by the court, and divided among 9 families. He kept the house. The lift plan ran to 51 pages. Needle beams through 11 openings cut in a foundation his great-grandfather poured. 140 jacking points on a unified manifold. 19 cribbing towers of oak timber, stacked the same way Jacob Marsden stacked them in 1931, because that part of the work has genuinely not improved. 4 utility crews, 2 tree crews. A traffic signal at the Route 9 intersection, lowered and raised again. A county permit that took 11 weeks and required a bond. 4.5 miles, in the other direction this time, out to a parcel above the Braden River that Logan had bought with the first check. It took 11 hours. Half of Cordova Falls came out and stood along the road, and the older ones brought the photograph from 1931 on their phones and held them up next to the real thing. And there is a picture from that morning that ran on the front page of the county paper, taken from the same angle as the one in the museum's second case on the left. And in the front row, hands in his pockets, in a coat too thin for the weather, is a 39-year-old man with a 7-year-old on his shoulders. The house came to rest on a new foundation the following week. Hudson's room faces the water. There is a beaver dam about 200 yards downstream, and the answer, as it turns out, is that they are mostly nocturnal. Deborah Foley drove out to Ridgewater Road in May, because she had not been told, and because nobody in that family was speaking to her. She parked where the driveway used to turn. There was nothing there. 11 acres of open ground with a rectangle of bare dirt on the rise, where a house had stood for 95 years. The concrete porch steps were still sitting there, 4 of them, going up to nothing at all. The mailbox was still at the road with Marsden on the side in her son-in-law's block handwriting. She sat in the car for a long time. That is what I mean when I say he never went home again. It is not a figure of speech. There was no longer a home there to go back to. He picked it up and took it with him. So, the 2 bags. I told you at the start to hold on to them, and here is why. Every single element of that plan was excellent. The pharmacology was excellent. The choice of an illness the victim already believed he was going to get was, and I say this with real disgust, brilliant. The decision not to kill him was disciplined. The money route through a mother's pasture was careful. 14 months of a doctor's chart written in the wife's voice is a piece of work that would have held up in front of most people on Earth. And the whole thing was sitting on one assumption, that 2 identical objects, 4 inches apart, in a refrigerator used by 3 people, including a 7-year-old, would never once get confused. Not once. In 14 months. In a house with a kid who was always late. That is not a plan. That is a bet, renewed every single morning, and she never noticed she was placing it. There is a rule in Logan Marsden's trade that I have been thinking about since I first read this file. Before you lift anything, you find the center of gravity, the one point the entire weight actually hangs from. And the thing about the center of gravity is that it is almost never where it looks like it should be. It is not in the middle. It is not under the biggest part. On that Queen Anne, it was 11 feet off the geometric center, because of a chimney and a staircase. And if you put your jacks where the house looks heaviest, you will tear it in half. So here is the takeaway, and it is not a warning about poison, because poison is not going to happen to you. When something in your life feels wrong and heavy and you cannot say why, do not argue about the corners. Do not relitigate the fight from Tuesday. Find the point the whole weight hangs from, and understand that it will not be where the noise is. In this story, the noise was a tremor, a diagnosis, a dying father, a grieving family. The center of gravity was a single sentence in a medical chart that read, "Exam less severe than reported functional decline." One doctor wrote that 4 times, in 4 different months, and it was true every time, and it was the whole case sitting there in 6 words. She saw it, she wrote it down, she did not have a category for it yet. So do the small, unglamorous thing. Read your own chart. Ask who reported the symptom. If everything anyone knows about your health, your money, or your reputation is coming to the world through one person's mouth, that is not intimacy. That is a single point of failure. And every structural engineer alive will tell you what those are for. And if you are the person standing 11 feet away with a tray in your hands, looking at something in a lunch bag that does not belong there, be Shirley Ramsey. Do not shout, do not accuse, do not put it back. Just walk over, put your hand flat on the table, and say you are going to hold on to that. 26 years of opening yogurt cups, and one afternoon she was the most important person in Braden County. She retired in June. Logan Marsden had the house moved past the school on the way out of town, deliberately, 4 blocks out of the route, at 6:40 in the morning, and every kid in that building was at the windows. I am Nathan. Go look at the 2 things in your life that are identical, and label one of them.